Section 1 of The Art of Conversation, 12 Golden Rules by Josephine Turk Baker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. He, read by Kevin S.
She, read by Devorah Allen.
Golden Rule number 1. Avoid unnecessary details. Do you know that what you say always interests me?
That is because we are such good comrades.
Not altogether. I think that it is because you never dwell upon details.
Then one is interesting in conversation according as one omits details?
Unnecessary details.
I remember that, when visiting some friends whom I had not seen for several years, my hostess said to me, "Ever since your arrival, I have been trying to discover why you are so interesting in conversation, and I have decided that it is because you omit unnecessary details." I felt that my hostess had paid me a high compliment.
Yes, but one that you deserve. Now, even in telling this incident, you were direct. The bore would have sidetracked and would have told innumerable and irrelevant details. I don't believe you could bore a person if you were to try.
I am quite sure that I could. Listen to this. Several years ago, 4 years ago, just this last June. No, it was only 3 years ago, because I remember now that 4 years ago I did not attend the alumni reunion of our college, and so it must have been 3 years ago. I was the guest of one of the members of my class. I was attending the annual reunion of the alumni of our college. Almost every year I attend the alumni reunion of our college, and on this occasion I was the guest of one of the members of my class. She had not been attending the reunions, and so I had not seen her for several years, 5 years at least, and—
Pardon my interruption, but you are a success.
As a bore?
No, as an imitator. I think that you should have been an actress.
Yes, I think that nature intended me for one, and I could have acted. Indeed, I usually find it difficult not to act. That is, I find it difficult to be myself.
Like Sensational Tommy and Tommy and Grizel.
Yes, in a way.
And why were you not an actress? Was it because you did not know that you had talent?
From an opposite reason. I had so many talents that, like the woman in Mother Goose, I hardly knew what to do.
That sounds modest. You probably would have been a great actress.
I might not have been. Sometimes, you know, persons who are very gifted seem to miss the best that life has to offer.
I've decided that you are interesting, not because you do not sidetrack, but because you have such a stupendous amount of conceit. You seem to be fully aware of what you possess. It is delightful.
My talent or my conceit?
Both.
I am sure that if anyone else possessed my talents, I should not hesitate to speak of them. Why should I not speak of mine?
That is one way to look at it. Now, I suppose if I were to tell you that you were very gifted, you would say, "Thank you, I think that I am too," or words to that effect.
Yes, I think that I should respond in some such way. Why should I not? Why shouldn't I recognize my gifts and be thankful for them?
Well, usually, you know, when anyone receives a compliment, he is apt to regard it as flattery, and to treat it accordingly. Or, if he thinks the praise is merited, his words are apt to belie his thoughts.
Yes, but that brooks of insincerity. However, we are a long way from our subject. We were wondering why some persons bore and why some do not. We decided that one must under no circumstances enter into too many details.
They are ruinous. If a person is very polite, he will feign an interest that he does not feel. Often, however, he betrays, by an absent expression, that the details have done their deadly work. You always seem interested, I notice, even when the narrator has wandered from the main road into innumerable bypaths.
I appear interested because I am interested, for I am continually on the alert to find out just how he is going to get back to the main road. I find, however, that in the majority of cases he never gets back. He is lost in such a labyrinth that, as compared with it, the Garden of Versailles and the maze of Hampton Court are as naught. And just as these world-famed networks have a kind of attraction for the curious, so I find it interesting to follow the bore as he goes from one intricate passage into another, in his endeavor to find an exit. But I must leave him to his fate, or I too shall be lost in a maze, and not be able to find the main path.
Then, golden rule number 1 is avoid unnecessary details. I shall try to remember the rule and profit by its significance. End of section 1. Section 2 of The Art of Conversation, 12 Golden Rules by Josephine Turk Baker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Golden Rule number 2. Do not ask question number 2 until number 1 has been answered. Since our last visit, I have been noticing the faults of my friends in conversation, and I have concluded that the most glaring fault one can have is to ask questions and then not wait for the answers. I have one friend in particular who, whenever he meets me, asks in the most solicitous way about my family, my health, etc., and then before I have an opportunity to respond, he proceeds to tell me about himself, his family, his ills, and the like.
I know the species very well. In fact, I have classified my friends according to their respective merits as listeners.
And where have you placed me?
At the head of the list.
As the greatest offender?
No, as the least. You always wait until I answer one question before you ask another.
Section 3 of The Art of Conversation. Do I ask many questions? 12 Golden Rules.
Not too many.
Josephine Turk Baker.
You may have noticed that there are as many
LibriVox
persons who ask too few questions as there are who ask too many.
Domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.
To ask many questions often indicates an undue amount of curiosity on the part of the questioner.
Do not interrupt another while he is speaking.
To ask too few, a lack of interest.
So we agree that the greatest
The reason why
fault
some
that a
persons
person
are so
can
very
have is
prosaic
to ask
and
questions
uninteresting
then, without
is that
waiting
they are
for the
entirely
answers,
absorbed in
plunge
themselves.
at once into a detailed
In
account of
consequence,
his own doings.
they ask few or no
I have
questions
discovered
whatever,
another fault, and
showing
one
that they are
I
not in the
fear
least
that
concerned in
I,
what interests
too,
their friends.
possess. That is,
There is a happy
to ask
mean
questions
where one
concerning
shows
the
neither
welfare
curiosity
of my friend
nor
and of his
disinterest.
family, and then after he has gotten fairly underway in the recital of his woes, so to interrupt him with irrelevant friends sometimes respond at such
I am sure
length
that
we
you
are
haven't
inclined to
this
wish
fault,
that we had
although
shown
it is
less
very
interest.
common. That
It
is
is
where
based
it is
upon
so
the principle
necessary
that
to remember the
people, as a
golden rule
rule,
that we spoke
are
of in
vitally
our last
concerned
conversation.
only in what concerns
Namely,
themselves.
avoid unnecessary
I
details.
have a friend who maintains
Yes,
that no one
and
really
as I've
enjoys
already told
listening
you,
to what
that
another
is why
has to
you are
say.
always interesting.
He says
never
that the
bore one
interested
with a
listener is
long
interested
story.
only in having the other
I
person
usually
finish
try to treat all my
in
friends
order that he
as
may have
carefully
the
as if
opportunity
each
to
one
tell
bore a
his tag,
tag.
marked,
I
"This is my
note,
busy
however,
day.
that
Make
as a
it
rule,
short."
people recite
Yes,
their
sir.
woes and
If
not
you have
their
any
wheels.
time to kill
But
your
of
own.
course, that depends upon
what
the
a rapid
individual.
pace we live.
Some
Anyway,
persons always
people
have
in the
a hard
country,
luck
the
story.
peasant
Others
class,
dwell
are never
upon
in
the
a
bright
hurry.
happenings
They talk
in their
slowly,
lives.
eat slowly,
I
and
think we
work
can
at the
each
same
recall
laggard
some
pace.
friend whose greatest
In other
pleasure is to
words,
pose as a
they
martyr.
exist, but do
Another
not
who,
live.
no matter what are his
They do not
ills,
enjoy what
has
we
always
enjoy.
something of interest to
A
impart
daily feast
pertaining
is
to
spread
some good
before them,
fortune,
but they do not
fancied or
partake of
otherwise,
it.
which has befallen him. What do they know of glowing
Speaking
sunsets
of
and
our
of
faults,
moonlit
I
waves,
think that the best way to
of shaded
correct them
walks
is
through
to notice
pathless
them in our
woods,
friends,
of
and then
narrow
to try to
streams
avoid them.
inwalled with trees?
But of course you haven't any.
The sunset
Any
tells
friends?
the peasant only of what
Any
the weather will
faults, of
bring to his
course.
crops.
I fear that
The
you are not
stretch
a
of
good
velvet
critic.
through which the streamlet
I
winds,
may
of
not
green
be, but you
pastures for
certainly
his
have
flocks.
none of the bad habits that
But
you
I have
have
gotten away from my
enumerated.
subject.
Oh, you couldn't
In
see
other
them if I
words,
had.
like the boar,
From
I
sheer
have sidetracked.
stupidity.
Hardly.
Only what you say does not
Only
bore.
as far as I am concerned,
You mean
have become
not you,
accustomed to think of me
nor
as
anyone
did
else.
Dick of Maisie.
Thank you.
In the light that
I
failed,
should thank
that
you
the queen
instead.
can do no wrong.
Now I am to remember
That
verse
reminds
that
me, I've
golden
just
rule
finished
number
reading
1 is
The Light That
avoid
Failed,
unnecessary
and I'm
details.
sure that
I shall never get
Rule
away
number
from the
2,
awfulness
do
of
not
it.
ask question
the
number
awfulness
2
of having
until
the light go out
question
forever.
number 1 has been answered.
Kipling makes one
And
see it all so
furthermore,
vividly.
One must be
where he
neither
says,
too curious nor
"I
too
shan't."
disinterested.
The voice rose
That
in a
is,
wail.
one must not
My
ask
God,
too few
I'm
nor
blind,
too
and the
many
darkness will never
questions.
go away.
Just enough.
He made as if to
I
leap
fear
from
that
the
I
bed,
shall find it
but
difficult to
Torpenhow's
observe
arms
this
were
rule,
around him,
but I
and
shall try
Torpenhow's
to
chin was
acquire
on
the
his
tact
shoulder,
that is
and his
necessary
breath was
for
squeezed
one
out of
to
him.
have it.
He could only
May
gasp.
I practice the art
"Blind."
when with you? And
That would
again,
be
the picture
charming.
that Kipling
And you may
draws of the
begin at
blind man
once.
who suddenly finds himself
End
unable
of
to
section
do that
2.
which he has been accustomed to do. I have the book with me. A wise man who is blind
Section
will keep
4
his
of
eyes
The
on the
Art of
floor and sit
Conversation.
still,
12
For
Golden
amusement,
Rules
he
by
may pick
Josephine
coal,
Turk
lump by
Baker.
lump, out of a light
This is a
scuttle
LibriVox
with the
recording.
tongs, and pile it
All
in a little
LibriVox
heap by the
recordings are
fender,
in the public
keeping
domain.
count of the lumps,
For more
which
information
must
or to
all be
volunteer,
put back again,
please
one
visit
by one, and
LibriVox.org.
very carefully.
Golden Rule number
He may set
4.
himself sums if he
Do
cares
not
to work them
contradict
out.
another,
He may talk to
especially
himself,
when the
or
subject
to the
under
cat
discussion
if she
is
chooses
of
to
trivial
visit him.
importance.
And if his trade has been that of an
We always
artist,
seem
he
to
may
drift
sketch
back
in
to
the
our
air with
favorite
his
topic.
forefinger.
How not to bore.
But that is too
At
much
least
like
we
drawing
discuss
a
it
pig
so
with his
frequently
eyes shut.
that I assume we are
He may go to
mutually
his
interested.
bookshelves and count his books,
I assure you that I
arranging
am
them in
very
order
much
of their
interested in
size,
everything
or
that
to his
assists me in
wardrobe
making
and count
myself
out
more
his shirts,
pleasing to my friends.
laying them in piles of
If
2
you
or
would
3
not
on
regard
the bed,
my
as
compliments
they
so
suffer from
dubiously,
frayed cuffs or
I
lost
should say
buttons.
that would be impossible.
Even this entertainment wearies
Another case
after
of the
a time,
infallibility of
and
the
all the
Queen.
times are very,
But to go
very
back to our
long.
subject, I often
I
wonder whether
suppose
this
that
pleasure
this
that we take
portrayal
in
is true to
receiving the
life.
approval of others
Undoubtedly,
is not
in a
virtually
way.
the root of all good.
But I had a novel
It is
experience
certainly
when
most
traveling east
fortunate
this
that we
summer.
do care for the good opinion
While on the
of our fellow
train,
beings.
I saw a gentleman
And
who was
especially
trying
where
to
we
interest a
strive
little
to
boy
marry,
who did not respond to his
Somehow we
advances.
never seem to outgrow our
I heard him
childish
ask
love
the
for
child
rewards.
whether he was a little boy
I
and
suppose
how
that if
old
the truth
he
were
was.
told, much that we
I
think
saw
we
then
do
that
for
the
the sake
gentleman
of
was
culture
blind.
is really
And
done
thinking
for
that
the
he might
sake of
prefer
Dame
to talk with
Grundy.
me, I
Of
introduced
course, I
myself
do not
to
mean
him
as applied to
and
vain
found in him a most
self-glorification,
delightful
but
conversationalist.
rather to our higher aims and purposes.
He told me that he had become blind
Most
very
of us, for
suddenly
example,
5 years ago,
think that we make
but
great
that his
efforts
work had
along
not
the
been
lines of
interrupted for a day
self-improvement for the
since.
sole satisfaction that
His
our efforts
position
may
as
give
manager
us.
of a large corporation
But I wonder how
necessitated
steadfastly
his
one would
frequent
work,
journeying and
each at
railroad
his chosen
trains.
calling.
But he had
If
continued
one
to
were on a
travel as
desert
before,
island, remote
sometimes
from
with
all
the
the
haunts
secretary
of men,
and sometimes alone. But to return
He was
to our
alone when I
subject,
met him.
you say that your
He was
latest
certainly
discovery is that
delightfully
even
cheerful
grown
and
persons
entertaining,
contradict one another.
And withal, he was fully
I thought that
informed
only
on
children
current
had
topics
this
of
fault.
interest.
So
It seemed
did I,
almost
but
impossible
my
to
attention
realize
was
that he was
called to
blind.
this a few days since.
His case
when
is
visiting
extraordinary.
my sister, but of
While
course
she
it
was
was
telling
not in
me
August,
something of
as
great
was poor
interest
Dick
to us both.
before the
Her
light
little
went
daughter
out.
contradicted her
I've
several
just
times
discovered
in the
another
course of our
reason why you are so
conversation.
very interesting.
Partly
It is because
I
you
was
always have some
annoyed,
novel
and partly
experience to
because I
recount.
wished to teach the child a
Yes,
lesson.
but you know
I
we
said to my
decided that
sister,
people did not care as
Have
a
you ever
rule to
noticed
hear
how
others talk.
frequently children contradict
Well, I
their
shall
elders?
retract my decision.
It is certainly one of
I've
the greatest
concluded
faults
that we
that a
usually
child
like
can
to
have.
hear others talk if
Yes,
they
she
have something
answered,
interesting
but many
to tell.
grown persons have the
Yes.
same fault.
We are all
And when I
children, in a
expressed
sense.
surprise, she
Tell
added,
us a story and
if
we
you
will
are
listen,
inclined to doubt the
provided the
truth of
storyteller
this
knows how to
assertion,
tell it.
just try to tell
Do you know
something
what
in
I
the
have
hearing
been
of
thinking
others who
of
are
while you
familiar
were
with the
telling me
story,
this
and
incident?
you will soon discern
That
that
we
the
had
fault
gotten a
is not
long way
confined
from
to
our
children.
original subject?
And then I discovered
No,
this
I
fault
was
not
just
only in
thinking of how
others,
much you
but
said
also
in
in myself.
comparatively few words.
Oh dear.
And that in telling
Maybe
this
I too
incident,
am guilty of
you
the
had
same
certainly
offense.
conformed to golden rule
I am
number
sure
one.
that you never
Avoid
contradict anyone
unnecessary
in the way that
details.
I mean.
And
It
you
is
have
certainly
conformed
very
to both the
embarrassing
rules
to
that
make
we
a
have learned.
statement, and then
Thank you.
to have it
Let me
contradicted.
see. Golden
even though
rule
the
number
matter
one
is of
is
little
avoid
consequence.
unnecessary details.
How many rules have we
Rule
learned
number
so
two,
far?
not to ask
Golden
question
rule
number
number
two
one
until
is
question
avoid
number one has
unnecessary
been answered,
details.
nor
Rule
be
number
too
two,
curious nor
do
too
not ask
disinterested.
question number
That
two
is, do not
until
ask
number
too
one has
few
been
nor
answered.
too many questions.
Do not be too
Just
curious
enough.
nor too disinterested.
And our new rule,
That is,
golden
do
rule
not
number
ask too many
3.
questions.
Do
nor
not
too
interrupt
few.
another while he is
Just
speaking.
enough. Rule
How
number
frequently
3,
this
do
rule
not
is broken.
interrupt another
Many
while he is
persons who
speaking.
ordinarily are
And
well
our new
bred
rule,
have the
golden
very
rule
habit
number
of
4,
interrupting others.
do not contradict
But I
another,
deserve no credit
especially
for
when the
observing
subject under
golden rule
discussion
number
is
3,
one of trivial
for you are never
importance.
tiresome.
So,
You
if
never tell a
Mrs.
long
von
story.
Stretcher tells us that
No, I
Mrs.
don't do
de
that.
Walters has crossed the
I
ocean
knew a gentleman
a
once
dozen
who used to
times in
say
as
with a
many
groan
years,
to his niece,
we are
who
not
was
to
rather
say,
verbose,
"Pardon us, only
"Oh,
6,
Alma,
and she goes
you tell
abroad
such a
only
long
once in 2
story.
years,"
Make it short.
which makes just
And so I always
Oh,
try to
yes,
make my story
just
short.
12 times.
Yes,
End of
the
section
person
3.
who contradicts frequently restates the matter, merely in another way. End of section 4.
Section 5 of The Art of Conversation, 12 Golden Rules by Josephine Turk Baker.
Baker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Golden Rule number 5. Do not do all the talking. Give your tired listener a chance. You haven't asked me about my golden discovery.
Oh dear, is there still another rule to learn? You know we have already had 4.
No, this isn't a rule. I've about come to the conclusion that people are charming in proportion as they can rise above the commonplace. Of course, they must observe all our golden rules, but this observance alone will not make them interesting in conversation. Last night, for example, I never was so greatly bored as when talking with a young lady to whom I had been recently introduced. She was so well bred that she observed all the golden rules from A to Z, and yet she was tiresome beyond endurance, simply because she hadn't a soul. She was a Philistine at the deepest dye. I must say that I am so conventional, in a way, that I eschew Bohemianism, but an out-and-out Philistine. Give me a Bohemian every time.
Then I suppose that golden rule number 5 would be, acquire a soul, and assume one if you have it not.
I suppose it is innate, one's soul, which to me stands for one's love of the beautiful, for the ideal. You see, whatever you speak about, you lift out of the commonplace. Life seems quite worth the while when I'm with you. All the inspiring things, books, music, painting, take on a new meaning when we talk about them. Last evening my newly made acquaintance and I discussed these subjects, but they did not interest me. Julia Marlowe, whom she had just seen, was merely a pretty woman who dressed perfectly. The latest book was something that bored, but that had to be read because everybody else was reading it. Music was an unknown quantity. What shall we do with Philistines like this?
Leave them to their idols. They will not be alone, for there are many to keep them company. The trouble with many persons is that they do not cultivate an admiration for the beautiful. Beautiful pictures, exquisite music, delightful books. They live in a world of materialism. Handsome houses, exquisite paintings, well-filled libraries are to them mere possessions, valuable because they are the embodied insignia of wealth. The person of high ideals delights in the beautiful because it brings him into harmony with that perfection for which he strives. In a beautiful painting, he sees the reaching out of the artist to produce not what is, but what should be. In a great literary production, the master intellect that can mold words as wax in the hands of an artisan. In beautiful music, the soul of the composer who can make one feel all that he has felt when under the magic sway of harmony. And so, beautiful things are loved, not alone for themselves, but for what they represent. For nothing beautiful has ever existed without its master creator, the power behind the throne, where the monarch beauty is at the beck and call of that giant, intellect.
Then, if we are to belong to the class who love the beautiful or what it represents, we are to cultivate our souls, that part of us which brings us in rapport with the divine in the universe. We are not to be sordid. We must not wish simply to possess. We must cultivate a love for the ideal, for what the beautiful represents.
Yes, and this can be done. In our modern schools, the best in literature, in art, in music is brought to the children. The child of today learns of Mozart, of Handel, of Wagner, and hears their music. He sees representations of great masterpieces of art, and learns to love the beautiful Madonnas of Raphael, to know the paintings of Rosa Bonheur, of Jean-François Millet. This education cannot fail to instill in children a love for the beautiful. To them, the world takes on a roseate tinge, while their minds eventually become storehouses in which are garnered the treasured thoughts of the ages. Nothing in everyday life can be wholly commonplace. Each peculiar incident in life, each peculiar mood of nature brings its accompanying suggestion.
Do you know, you are saying what I should like to say, but what I cannot find words to express. Possibly that is one reason why I enjoy your society more than that of all others, because you say the things that I would say, if I could but express my thoughts. It is for this reason that we admire an author, because he puts into words what we think, what we feel.
I think we should add golden rule number 5 to our list. Namely, do not do all the talking. Give your tired listener an opportunity to speak.
I am sure that I would rather listen than talk when you are with me.
I am half inclined to believe you, for you are certainly perfect, as a listener. End of section 5.
Section 6 of The Art of Conversation, 12 Golden Rules by Josephine Turk Baker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Golden Rule number 6. Be not continually the hero of your own story, and on the other hand, do not leave your story without a hero. Ships that pass in the night and speak each other in passing, only a signal show and a distant voice in the darkness. So on the ocean of life we pass and speak one another, only a look and a voice, then darkness again, and a silence.
And what recalled the poem?
I was thinking of the people whom we meet, and who speak us in passing, people whom we may never meet again, but whom we never can forget.
That intangible something which makes us wish to become more closely associated with our new-made acquaintance. What is it? It is indefinable. We meet someone at the theater, at the club, at the social function, and there lingers with us for many days the remembrance of the few brief moments in which we felt that we were as twin spirits, moving musically to a lute's well-ordered law. Strange as it may seem, we live in a world of people. People to the right of us, people to the left of us, everywhere about us, and only here and there a kindred spirit, in whose moral and mental atmosphere we bask, as in the rays of sunshine. This something that makes us feel that only the element of time is needed to make of our newly formed acquaintance a friend that shall last through life. What is it? A warm hand-clasp, a friendly word, and in one brief moment, that mysterious something that clouds the soul is thrown aside, and in our sky a new star appears, as fixed as Polaris in the heavens. When we have an experience of this kind, although we may have interchanged but few words with our friend, we feel intuitively that we could spend many hours together, and that we should never tire of exchanging ideas.
Yes, but does this not presuppose a mind stored with those treasured thoughts about which we were speaking in our last conversation?
Possibly, in a sense. But first of all, it presupposes harmony of taste, of feeling, of ideas. This does not mean, of course, that each shall agree with the other in all essentials, but that each shall have the same broad and intelligent way of looking at a subject, and a consideration each for the other's opinions.
I think, though, that as a basis for harmonious intercourse, there must be an elimination of self. No one who is thoroughly selfish can interest anyone but himself. It seems to me that the ideal relation between friends presupposes an entire elimination of self.
Not necessarily so. One of the most tiresome persons that I know is a gentleman who never refers to himself, to his aspirations, or to his plans, and for this reason he fails entirely to awaken in his listener any interest in his personality whatsoever. He is the antipode of the person who talks only of what interests him. The person who uses discretion will not avoid all reference to himself, nor will he continually make himself the hero of his own story. It behooves us all to examine ourselves, and if we have either one of these faults, to rid ourselves of it at once. In directing the trend of conversation, the tactful person will choose topics of mutual interest. People are interesting not in proportion as they recount their personal experiences, but as they evince a broad, general interest in what concerns others.
We might add another golden rule to our list. Golden rule number 6. Be not continually the hero of your own story, nor, on the other hand, do not leave your story without a hero. In other words, it is fatal to one's success as a conversationalist either to eliminate oneself entirely or to appear self-centered.
You might say to be self-centered. Selfishness is one of the most disagreeable traits that a person can have, and he who has this to a marked degree should try to eradicate it. Someone has said, if we had to count our ills, we would not choose suspense. We might add, if we had to choose our faults, we should not choose selfishness. A person may observe all the golden rules that we have enumerated, but if he is at heart a selfish person, his conversation will lack the charm that emanates from the whole-souled individual, whose first thought is to interest and entertain others. Let us cultivate an unselfish spirit, for without this, our words will be but as sounding brass and tinkling cymbals. End of section 6.
Section 7 of The Art of Conversation, 12 Golden Rules by Josephine Turk Baker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Golden Rule number 7. Choose subject of mutual interest. And here we are again at one of your charming at-homes, and I, as usual, am the only guest. It is delightful of you to select for my visits those evenings where there is no possibility of our being interrupted while discussing our favorite topic.
If I were not at home on these occasions, we should have very little opportunity to talk about the subjects in which we are mutually interested. It is decidedly paradoxical, is it not, to be at home under the circumstances?
It is, to say the least, decidedly pleasant. For otherwise, how should you be able to teach me that delightful art, the art of conversation? I'm just selfish enough to exult in my being the only diplomat at your salons.
What is that line about conversations being like an orchestra, where all the instruments should bear a part, but where none should play together?
To my thinking, conversation is most delightful when it is most unlike an orchestra. For my part, I prefer those charming duos where the sweet voice of the soprano rises far above the organ's swell.
Conversation is more often like an orchestra where all the instruments play together, and where no particular one can be heard. I see that a conversation in which many take part is not to your liking.
As in music, so with my friends, I prefer to follow the individual, to come into harmony with his thoughts and feelings. The trite saying that corporations have no souls can be applied with equal propriety to a body of individuals at a social function where the bored look on their faces shows that they have failed to find a subject of general interest, and are in consequence suffering in durance vile.
Conversation is enjoyable only when the participants are equally interested in the subject under discussion. And while it is not difficult for two persons to find topics of mutual interest, it is not so easy for several individuals to hit upon some topic in which all are equally interested. Consequently, there is much greater opportunity for enjoyment in social converse where only two are gathered together.
Yes, I know. No matter how apparently dry a subject is to me, it might be of keen interest to someone else.
Certainly. Only a few evenings since, I noticed at a social function a lady and gentleman deeply engaged for a long time in the discussion of some topic in which each was apparently vitally interested. I learned afterwards that the gentleman was the editor-in-chief of a new dictionary recently compiled, and that the lady was the teacher of English in a college. They were discussing the relative merits of the diacritical markings of the Century, Standard, and International dictionaries, compared with those of Old Webster.
I should call that an extremely dry subject.
Oh, they found it fascinating. They really became excited, not impolitely so, but deeply absorbed in following each other through the maze of half-circles and dots, straight lines and curved.
That is why people whom we meet, polite and kindly people, try to draw us out to find what we are interested in, so as not to hinge the conversation on politics when it should be on potatoes or on poetry.
The whole secret of pleasant social converse lies in the participants finding subjects of mutual interest. Why, I have heard two persons discuss by the hour the feasibility of raising ducks as a means of livelihood. Others that of manufacturing a washing machine that would wash and boil clothing at the same time. So you see, it doesn't matter whether the topic is politics or poetry, the latest work in science or in fiction, whether it is music or painting. The main point is that the subject shall be of mutual interest to those discussing it.
Then we may add another rule to our list, Golden Rule number 7. Choose subjects of mutual interest. Don't discuss politics when you should be talking about poetry, fact instead of fiction, science instead of sunsets.
Yes, and be sure that both are equally interested, or else one or the other will have that bored look to which you referred a short time since.
People sometimes appear interested when they are not.
Yes, but the keen observer will detect whether the smile extends farther than the parted lips. If people would be genuine and less artificial after a pleasant evening spent in social converse, there would linger with one a memory as pleasing and as refreshing as is the sweet fragrance wafted from country clover fields to the traveller on the dusty road. In our social intercourse with one another, let us omit all unpleasant topics, and choose only those in which both are equally interested. End of section 7.
Section 8 of The Art of Conversation, 12 Golden Rules by Josephine Turk Baker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Golden Rule number 8. Be a good listener. And here we are again in your bower of roses and carnations. It is always summer here, for there are always flowers. You wear them, too, as another would wear her jewels. She went by dale, and she went by down, with a single rose in her hair.
This is as I like my flowers, around me and about me. Conservatories have no charm for me, for one cannot live in a conservatory. I like my roses where, as I sit and write, I can inhale their fragrance and see their wondrous beauty. What is more beautiful than a rose?
Wouldn't The Woman with the Rose make a nice title for a poem?
You are really lacking in originality. You never would have thought of it in the world if The Man with the Hoe had not suggested it.
Oh, I agree with you that I am not original, and that the title was suggested, but not, as you think, by the man with the hoe.
Aren't we wasting valuable time? You know we were going to discuss Golden Rule number 8, and we haven't even decided what it shall be.
Be a good listener. Wasn't it Addison who said that the most skillful flattery was to let a person talk on and be a good listener? But somehow this has such a ring of insincerity. Now, I am sure that I should not wish to be beguiled into thinking that I was entertaining my friend when, in reality, I was boring him.
Yes, but a person who observes all our golden rules will not talk on. You know, there are few persons who can talk on and not bore their listeners. Of course, if people were tactful and would observe Golden Rule number 7, choose topics in which all are interested, it would not be necessary for the listener to feign an interest if he has it not.
But what are we going to do when we are in the society of those who do not observe this rule?
Sometimes we can enjoy the conversation of others for reasons opposite to what might be expected. For example, a few days since, I was one of several guests at a luncheon, and I was very much amused in noting how subjects which in themselves seemed very prosaic could elicit so much enthusiasm in their discussion. For example, the guests discussed the making of salads, and much enthusiasm was expended over a mixture of fruit, nuts, and olive oil. The subject was certainly highly relevant, as the very kind of salad in question was in evidence, calling forth enthusiastic encomiums from all.
I suppose you are often amused at the amount of interest shown in trivial subjects?
No, I too at times like to relax and to talk about subjects that would seem frivolous to many. While much of my time and close attention must necessarily be given to study, for this reason, when there is any diverting influence, I prefer occasionally to forget everything of a serious nature, and like the bee that goes from flower to sip of each its sweetness, so I enjoy passing from one subject to another, discussing only lightly each in turn. So you see, whether it is salads or pâtés, Mrs. Campbell or Paderewski, shirred gowns or pleated, these subjects at times may prove interesting and diverting.
But when a person is deeply interested in some special study that counts, I cannot see how he can find much satisfaction in the discussion of topics so very foreign to his specialty.
As I have just implied, the specialist finds it necessary to relax. I have in mind a noted physician who spends many of his waking hours, and hours when he should be sleeping, either in his laboratory or with his patients. But immediately when he enters his drawing-room to greet a friend, he forgets his work utterly for the time being, and before many minutes have passed, his listener is convulsed with laughter over some new story, the latest acquisition to the doctor's stock.
Do you know, I often wonder why people do not cultivate the art of storytelling. It seems to me that if one would entertain one's friends now and then with a good story, It would enliven what would otherwise be a very dull occasion.
Storytellers, good storytellers, are probably born, not made. And yet, the person who is not especially gifted in this art may succeed in entertaining his listeners, provided that he has wit enough to remember the point, and to couch his language so that the denouement is not surmised. For surprise is an important element in the telling of a story.
Occasionally I hear a good story and one that I wish to remember, but I can never trust myself to repeat it for fear that I shall commit the flagrant sin of missing the point, and that omission would of course be unpardonable.
I think you might become a very successful raconteur if you would give some attention to the art in question. Of course, the important thing to remember is, what are the essentials? To omit all unnecessary details, to keep the listener in suspense, and above all, not to omit the point. We cannot all be Charles Lambs nor Sidney Smiths, but we can each have our little store of funnycisms from which to draw when the occasion is opportune, or the story relevant.
Well, I suppose we must decide that one must be a good listener at all hazards, and that one must find something of interest in the conversation of others, even though the subject may be salads when it should be suffrage. For example, shall we make be a good listener at all hazards, golden rule number 8?
Yes, I suppose so. But if we could all remember and practice our other golden rules, we should not need to add this one to the list.
Let me see whether I can enumerate them. Golden rule number 1, avoid unnecessary details. 2, do not ask question number 2 until number 1 has been answered, nor be too curious nor too disinterested. That is, do not ask too many questions nor too few. 3, do not interrupt another while he is speaking. 4, do not contradict another, especially when the subject under discussion is of trivial importance. 5, do not do all the talking. Give your tired listener a chance. 6, be not continually the hero of your own story, and on the other hand, do not leave your story without a hero. 7, choose subjects of mutual interest. And our latest acquisition, golden rule number 8, be a good listener.
You have done remarkably well to remember all these rules.
Haven't I earned a reward?
What shall it be?
The rose in your hair. End of section 8. Section 9 of The Art of Conversation, 12 Golden Rules by Josephine Turk Baker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Golden Rule number 9. Make your speech in harmony with your surroundings. Let us walk along the shore, away from our friends at the hotel. The night is far too beautiful to spend in discussing the merits of biscuit and honey compared with those of strawberries and cake.
And with such a sky and such a scene before them. And the day, how perfect it has been. The blue sky leaned silently above, and all its high and azure-circled roof beneath the wave was imaged back and seemed the deep to pave with its transparent beauty.
Oh, they're not thinking of the sea nor of the sky, although when I saw one of the ladies gazing intently at the moon, I thought that she, like you and me, had succumbed to the influence of its magic beams. But I very soon became disillusioned, for I heard her suddenly exclaim, "Oh, I wish I had some Welsh rarebit. I'm so very fond of Welsh rarebit."
Her thoughts were evidently relevant, as the moon probably suggested to her green cheese, and from that it was only a step to the toasted article. I dislike to hear a person express a fondness for food. I know that it is correct to use fond in this way, but to me fondness should be used only with reference to one's friends. But to be fond of Welsh rarebit, I should prefer to use another expression.
Of course, you aren't fond of anything but flowers and books and music. Oh, and the moon.
And people, they come first.
Everybody?
Not everybody, only a few.
Including?
I think that we should go back to our friends.
And discuss Welsh rarebit? Let us take this boat and glide over this silvery lake. We can find more interesting subjects to talk about than edibles, and if we cannot, we can at least be silent and let the glorious night speak for us."
Because of just such nights, I come here every year.
"But the moon, like the sun, shines everywhere for all."
Yes, but not everywhere alike. There must be trees with branches outspread to catch its silvery beams, and giant hills in the distance to form a heavy background. The full moon shining on our great Lake Michigan is a glorious sight, but that which is needed to make the scene perfect is not there. But here, nothing is wanting. O beauteous lake, how radiantly dost thou wear thy jewels upon thy bosom fair, made fairer still by Luna's silvery beams.
The poet is nature's interpreter. He expresses what we feel, what we should wish to say, were we able to express our thoughts in poetic language. But sometimes he does not interpret truly. Wasn't it Browning who said, "Never the time and the place and the loved one all together"?
I don't see the relevancy of the quotation. We must go back to the hotel. Our friends will miss us.
"But you haven't heard my lesson yet, as we used to say in school. I have to recite all the golden rules, and add our new one. What shall it be?"
Rule number 9. One's speech should be in harmony with one's surroundings.
In other words, a person should not talk about cheese when the moon would be a more fitting topic.
Or when it might be more fitting to remain silent.
Someone has said silence is the virtue of the feeble, but it is probably as often the virtue of the wise.
It was Carlyle who said, "Consider the significance of silence. It is boundless, never by meditating to be exhausted, unspeakably profitable to thee. Cease that chaotic hubbub, wherein thy own soul runs to waste, to confused suicidal dislocation and stupor. Out of silence comes thy strength. Speech is silvern, silence is golden. Speech is human, silence is divine." End of section 9.
Section 10 of The Art of Conversation, 12 Golden Rules by Josephine Turk Baker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Golden Rule number 10. Do not exaggerate. You may remember that one of the extracts that I read to you from my notebook referred to exaggeration in conversation. Do you know, I've been paying attention to this fault, and I find that it is decidedly general, even with people who are supposed to be honest and sincere. It is really one phase of falsifying. In my opinion, it is a very disagreeable habit, and one that a person should try to rid himself of.
Parents cannot be too careful in the bringing up of their children to see that they do not form the habit of exaggerating what they undertake to tell. Why, some persons cannot make the simplest statement without exaggerating the facts. For instance, if one undertakes to give the price of a garment or of some furniture, the amount paid is always increased in the telling of the story. And so with the narration of trivial events. The speaker will enlarge his statements until he presents a distorted picture to the mental vision of the listener. The exaggeration of facts should certainly be avoided, and a person can overcome this tendency in himself if, when he finds that he is making a misstatement, he will correct himself and give a true version. For example, if he finds that he is fixing the cost of a possession at $5 when it should be $4.50, he can correct the error without even betraying his intention to falsify. By doing this, he gradually trains himself to adhere to facts. For while the price of the article may be a matter of small consequence, it is a matter of far more importance that the person who has the habit shall correct his tendency to misstate facts. So again, when one is narrating an incident in one's experience, the same strict adherence to the facts should be observed. In this way, a person establishes a reputation for veracity. We all have friends in whose statements we place no reliance, simply because we know that they invariably exaggerate every fact that comes within their observation or experience. I know of no fault in conversation that is more grievous than this, nor that can give one such a general air of insincerity in all things.
I know I have friends whom I cannot believe, no matter how serious they are in impressing upon me the truth of the information that they are so willing to impart.
Of course, when persons of this kind attack the reputation of others, then, indeed, does their fault become a serious one. But there are many, otherwise well-meaning, persons who would not speak ill of another, who place themselves continually at a disadvantage by their exaggerated speech. There is the schoolgirl, for example, who finds every person and thing perfectly lovely, or perfectly horrid, as the case may be, who had the most beautiful time in her life last night, who finds her teacher divine, tennis a dream of delight. Everything, no matter what, is just dandy or dear. Later in life she may exaggerate as to her husband's income, her children's virtues or appearance, the price of her garments, and in this way she will acquire the unenviable reputation for insincerity, unreliability. No one will give any credence to what she says, simply because she is known always to exaggerate the facts.
I feel as you do, and when I find myself enlarging upon the facts, I try immediately to correct my fault and adhere to an actual recital.
Of course, we know that in telling a story for the sake of its humor, a person will sometimes lapse into an enlargement of the details, but, as Rudyard Kipling would say, that is another story.
Had we not better make this golden rule number 10? I wonder whether I can recite all the golden rules. Golden rule number 1, avoid unnecessary details. 2, do not ask question number 2 until number 1 has been answered, nor be too curious nor too disinterested. That is, do not ask too many questions, nor too few. 3, do not interrupt another while he is speaking. 4, do not contradict another, especially when the subject under discussion is of trivial importance. 5, do not do all the talking. Give your tired listener a chance. 6, be not continually the hero of your own story, and on the other hand, do not leave your story without a hero. 7, choose subjects of mutual interest. 8, be a good listener. 9, make your speech in harmony with your surroundings. 10, do not exaggerate, our new rule. End of section 10. Section 11 of The Art of Conversation, 12 Golden Rules by Josephine Turk Baker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Golden Rule number 11. Indulge occasionally in a relevant quotation, but do not garble it. I've just been reading a very interesting article entitled Learning by Heart, and I've become impressed with the idea that one should occasionally commit to memory inspiring passages in verse and prose. In the language of the author, they may come to us in our dull moments to refresh us as with spring flowers, in our selfish musings, to win us by pure delight from the tyranny of foolish castle-building, self-congratulations, and mean anxieties. They may be with us in the workshop, in the crowded streets, by the fireside, sometimes on pleasant hillsides, or by sounding shores, noble friends and companions, our own, never intrusive, ever at hand, coming at our call.
Someone has said that an apt quotation is as good as an original remark. It is certainly always relevant. We cannot all be Wordsworths or Tennysons, Charles Lambs or Carlyles, but we can make some of their best thoughts our own. A conversation or a letter in which some choice quotation finds a place is certainly thus improved and lifted above the commonplace. It was Johnson who said that classical quotation was the parole of literary men all over the world.
For a long time I have been copying in a notebook extracts that have interested me, but it did not occur to me to commit them to memory. Hereafter I shall do so, for I am sure that it will add to my resources, both in conversation and in letter writing.
Some of the most delightful letters that I have ever received have been those in which there have been quotations, so relevant, so charming that for the time being they seem to have been written for me alone.
I have always hesitated to interpolate my conversation or letters with quotations, for fear that I might seem to be airing my familiarity with classical literature.
Of course, one does not wish to appear pedantic, and one will not if one will use the quotation for the occasion, instead of making an occasion for the quotation. The proportions, too, of a conversation or a letter must be preserved. If one is talking about a commonplace subject, the quotation, if one is made, should be in keeping with the thought. As a clever writer has said, a dull face invites a dull fate. And so with a commonplace subject, the treatment should be in accordance with it.
Some persons are never able to quote a passage or tell an anecdote without perverting the meaning. In fact, I have long been interested in noticing how inexact the majority of people are in making statements of all kinds. I can recall several friends who are unreliable in what they say. Their statements should be checked up, verified, as we say in business.
As someone has said, a garbled quotation may be the most effectual perversion of an author's meaning, and a partial representation of an incident in a man's life may be the most malignant of all calumnies.
How very relevant that quotation is. You have certainly just exemplified your own suggestion, namely that the quotation should be used to suit the occasion. Shall we make this golden rule number 11? Occasionally indulge in a relevant quotation, but do not garble it?
Certainly. A golden rule that it is well occasionally to observe. End of section 11.
Section 12 of The Art of Conversation, 12 Golden Rules by Josephine Turk Baker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Golden Rule number 12. Cultivate tact. Consider the significance of silence. It is boundless, never by meditating to be exhausted, unspeakably profitable to thee. Cease that chaotic hubbub wherein thine own soul runs to waste, to confuse suicidal dislocation and stupor. Out of silence comes thy strength. Speech is silvern, silence is golden. Speech is human, silence is divine.
And what suggested the lines from Carlyle?
Oh, I was thinking of one of the extracts in my list of quotations relevant to our subject, the art of conversation. It is when you come close to a man in conversation that you discover what his real abilities are. One might add, and what they are not.
And I suppose that the line suggested the thought that, in many instances, to quote Carlyle again, speech is silvern, silence is golden, speech is human, silence is divine.
Undoubtedly, in many instances, it would be better to preserve a discreet silence than to say that which is disagreeable or untruthful. Of course, the tactful person can frequently so turn the conversation as to be obliged to adopt neither alternative.
One should always be truthful, and one should never say that which would be displeasing to the listener. Of course, we must accept those semi-disagreeable things which we sometimes feel privileged to say to our relatives or our best friends, on the ground that we are champions on the side of truth.
I have always maintained that it is only a true friend who will tell the unpleasant home truths.
Yes, we can all remember occasions when our expressed resentment at some well-meant criticism offered by a member of the family, for example, was met by the rejoinder that it was the truth.
The truth is not always pleasing to the ear, and I agree with you that, except in the case of the privileged few, only the pleasing things should be told.
That is all, provided, of course, that they are at the same time truthful.
And if they are not?
Then they should be left unsaid, for one's speech should never be insincere or flippant.
To be told that one is not looking well or is looking ill or older, as the case may be, is certainly not conducive to pleasant feelings on the part of the listener.
Frequently, the person who would not be guilty of offenses of this kind will arrive at the same results in an indirect way. For example, A, who may be too polite to tell B that he is getting along in years, will ask him whether the handsome young lady seen in his company at the theatre the previous evening is his daughter. thinking thus to compliment him as being the proud parent of so beautiful a maiden. Whereas A, who prides himself upon his youthful appearance, and thinks that he is holding his own against Father Time, fails to appreciate the would-be compliment. Mrs. C informs Mrs. D that she looks 10 years younger since becoming so stout, while Mrs. E advises Mrs. F to buy a hat, as up-to-date elderly women no longer wear bonnets, and so on through the alphabet.
Oh, I suppose it is impossible for people who are so obtuse as these to go through the world without blundering at every step.
I don't know. It seems to me that these unthinking people might be taught to think. Surely we can all learn by observation and experience, and it would seem that persons fairly introspective might discover that it is not direct speech alone that wounds or offends. We all know that the prettiest compliments are often those which are implied, and conversely, sometimes it is the suggestive criticism or censure that wounds the most.
Then we must remember that we should keep our minds alert, that we must not be found napping, that it is not sufficient that we refrain from giving pointed home thrusts, but that we should never, even by indirect speech, leave with our listener an unpleasant memory.
Yes, we meet some people, often only for a moment, only once perhaps in a lifetime. But it is possible in many instances to make that moment linger forever as a pleasant memory to that other. We can all remember some occasion when there was merely a hand-clasp, when but few words were spoken, but the memory is ours forever. Something that was said, perhaps, seemingly trivial, but glorified by the speaker's smile, by the sincerity of his heart.
After all, to sum it up, it is the word TACT, or the lack of it, that makes a person correspondingly agreeable or disagreeable in his social intercourse with another. Someone has defined tact as the art of pleasing, and so I think we might add this mandate to our golden rules. Cultivate the art of pleasing. Say the right thing or say nothing. Now, I'm going to recite all our golden rules, for I know them by heart. Golden rule number 1, avoid unnecessary details. 2, do not ask question number 2 until number 1 has been answered, nor be too curious and too disinterested. That is, do not ask too many questions nor too few. 3, do not interrupt another while he is speaking. 4, do not contradict another, especially when the subject under discussion is of trivial importance. 5, do not do all the talking. Give your tired listener a chance. 6, be not continually the hero of your own story, nor, on the other hand, do not leave your story without a hero. 7, choose subjects of mutual interest. 8, be a good listener. 9, make your speech in harmony with your surroundings. 10, do not exaggerate. 11, indulge occasionally in a relevant quotation, but do not garble it. 12, cultivate tact, our new rule. End of section 12. End of The Art of Conversation, 12 Golden Rules by Josephine Turk Baker.